Welcome to another audit walkthrough video from SuperfastCPA. I'm Logan, and in today's video, we're going to be going over Audit Area 2. This is Section F. This is a remembering and understanding topic. Identify the factors to consider in determining the extent to which an engagement team can use the work of an internal audit function, IT auditor, auditor specialist, management specialist, component auditor, or a referred to auditor. And we're going to be doing that the SuperfastCPA way, which is diving straight into the questions to learn the material. Now, if you don't know much about our strategies, make sure you go to SuperfastCPA.com and sign up for our free 1-hour webinar training. Again, it's free, it's 1 hour long, and in that 1 hour, we will teach you the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam so you don't waste months or even years of your time. So make sure you check that out. And after you watch that, you're going to want to learn more. So make sure you also check out becoming a SuperfastCPA Pro member. SuperfastCPA Pro members get access to the full 10-question versions of these 5-question YouTube videos. So just to make sure that's clear, in today's video, we're only going to be going over 5 questions, but SuperfastCPA Pro members will get access to the full 10-question video so that they can get a little bit more help and a little bit more understanding. So make sure you check out becoming a SuperfastCPA Pro member. Now with all that, let's dive straight into the questions. All right, here we are at question 1. And one thing I will say as we're diving into these questions, as I was learning about this and kind of seeing what the AICPA has out there and things like that, it seems like the biggest focus when it comes to this topic is the internal audit function, specialists, a little bit about management specialists. I didn't see very much about IT auditors and things like that. And I think that the idea behind that is the fact that mainly the things that we're going to be talking about kind of apply to all kinds of specialists and to most kinds of like auditors, like IT auditors, internal auditors, and things like that. So we're going to mainly be learning about the internal audit function and specialists, but basically take what you learn here and you'll probably be able to apply it to any other question you may see. Although again, this seems to be the focus. So let's go ahead and dive into question 1. When determining whether to use the work of an internal audit function, which of the following factors should the engagement team consider? Okay, let's walk through the options. Option A, the internal auditor's objectivity. Option B, the internal auditor's job title. Option C, whether the internal auditors work full-time or part-time. Or option D, the number of years the internal audit function has existed. So again, which one of these things is a factor that the external auditor, the independent auditor, needs to consider when using the internal audit function? Now, if you have no idea what any of this really even means, that's okay. We're going to use this question and the questions in this video to learn about the topic. So it's fine if we dive straight into the explanation. If you want, maybe pause the video and think about it. But if not, let's go ahead and go to the explanation. All right, here we are. The answer is A, the internal auditor's objectivity. So that is one thing that needs to be a factor. It needs to be something that's assessed about the internal audit function if the external auditor is going to use their work. So let's talk about this. When considering whether to use the work of internal auditors, the engagement team must evaluate both their objectivity and competence. So let's talk about what both of those mean. Objectivity refers to the internal auditor's ability to perform their work without bias or undue influence. This is assessed by considering factors such as their reporting structure, so that would be whether they report to those charged with governance rather than management, and any conflicts of interest. So this is where you want to kind of see if the internal auditors don't really have, again, conflicts of interest, that they're reporting to the correct people, that they don't have bias, things like that. Now let's talk about competence. Competence refers to whether the internal auditors have the necessary knowledge, skills, and training to perform their work reliably. The engagement team assesses this by reviewing their professional qualifications, experience, adherence to internal auditing standards, and the quality of their past work, including whether their findings are well documented, supported by evidence, and align with professional auditing practices. So these are some things that you need to consider if you're going to be using an internal audit function. You need to be looking at the objectivity and the competence of the internal auditors to know if you want to use their work as audit evidence or not. With that, let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 2. And this is a situation where I always like to point this out. If you see a question that has multiple paragraphs or a lot of sentences, you always want to read the last sentence first. You want to read that because very frequently that will be the actual question. That's what's going to give you context for what the whole question is about. And, it might seem kind of silly in these videos, but this is a great test strategy on test day because you have no idea what you're going to be seeing in the questions. So you want to read the last question first or the last sentence first because that will let you know what you're dealing with in that question. And then you'll quickly be able to, as you're reading through the whole question, kind of look for what you're supposed to be using in the question to get the correct answer. So that's why we do this. Let's go ahead and try it in this one. Which of the following is true regarding the external auditor's responsibilities when using the work of the internal audit function? So again, imagine if you were at the exam center and you saw this question and you read that last part first, you would immediately know that you're dealing with an internal audit function and what the external auditor's responsibilities are for using their work. And again, this is assuming that you've studied this all before test day. So you would kind of start thinking, oh, this is what I need to be looking for. And then you read through the rest of the question. An external auditor plans to use the work of an internal audit function to assist with audit procedures for a financial statement audit. The internal auditors will perform certain substantive tests under the direction of the external auditor. So again, which of the following is true regarding the external auditor's responsibilities when using the work of the internal audit function? So let's walk through this. This is more things that the auditor needs to consider, more factors they need to consider. Option A, the external auditor must supervise and review the internal auditor's work. Option B, the external auditor may delegate responsibility for evaluating significant estimates to the internal auditors. Option C, the external auditor may rely entirely on the internal auditor's work without performing additional procedures. Or option D, the external auditor is not allowed to use the work of internal auditors for substantive testing. Okay, so out of these different options, which one sounds like the correct answer? Based on what we learned in the first question, you might have a general idea of what the correct answer is here. So maybe pause the video and think through this. If not, let's go ahead and look at the answer together. All right, here we are. The answer is A, the external auditor must supervise and review the internal auditor's work. So let's walk through this. When using the work of an internal audit function, the external auditor remains responsible for the audit and must supervise and review the internal auditor's work to ensure it meets professional standards. The external auditor cannot blindly rely on the internal auditor's work without performing their own assessments. Additionally, internal auditors cannot make judgment calls on behalf of the external auditor. This means they cannot evaluate significant estimates, complex accounting decisions, or matters requiring professional skepticism. These areas must be assessed directly by the external auditor. So we learned some more things that external auditors need to be considering when they are using the work of internal auditors, or when they're trying to decide if they're going to use the work of internal auditors. We talked about objectivity and competence, but they also need to know that they're going to have to review and supervise the work of the internal auditors, and that the internal auditors cannot make judgment calls when it comes to the audit. So that's something super important that you need to know. Internal auditors cannot make judgment calls for the audit. So they can't make significant estimates, they can't evaluate complex accounting decisions, they can't do things that require professional skepticism. Again, when it comes to professional judgment, the internal auditors cannot do that. That's the responsibility of the external auditor. Now with that, we learned a little bit more about the internal audit function. Now let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 3. Which of the following individuals would not be considered a specialist for the purpose of an external audit? Okay, let's walk through the options. Option A, a valuation expert hired to assess the fair value of complex financial instruments. Option B, an actuary engaged to evaluate a company's pension liability. Option C, a tax expert providing technical guidance on deferred tax calculations. Or option D, a legal expert analyzing the impact of pending litigation. Okay, so out of these different options, which one would probably not be considered a specialist? Now, to be honest, if you haven't seen this before, probably all of these are going to sound like they're specialists. So maybe pause the video, think through this, but if not, that's okay. We're going to learn about this if you don't really know what's going on. So let's go to the explanation. All right, here we are at the answer. C, a tax expert providing technical guidance on deferred tax calculations. And that might be a little bit confusing. So let's walk through this to understand kind of the definition of an auditor's specialist, specifically when it comes to auditing and the CPA exam. An auditor's specialist is an individual or organization with expertise in a field other than accounting or auditing that assists the external auditor in obtaining sufficient audit evidence. Specialists are used when an audit requires technical knowledge outside the auditor's expertise, such as valuation, actuarial calculations, legal analysis, or engineering assessments. So, based on what we just said, common specialists used in audits include valuation experts or specialists. So they would be doing things like assessing fair value of financial instruments or intangible assets. Actuaries, they would be doing things like estimating pension liabilities or insurance reserves. Then there's legal experts. They would be doing things like analyzing pending litigation or regulatory matters. And then there's engineers. They would be assessing things like environmental liabilities or depreciation of specialized assets. Now, this is where you might have gotten a little bit confused, but based on the explanation, you'll kind of understand why a tax expert, and that was in option C, is not considered a specialist in the audit context because taxation falls within the broader field of accounting. While tax experts provide valuable guidance, they do not meet the definition of a specialist requiring expertise outside accounting or auditing. Now, you may hear somebody or you may think about this and kind of argue against that not being counted as a specialist, but specifically when it comes to the CPA exam, that's how you need to think. I'm no expert in all things tax or all things auditing, but when it comes to the CPA exam, this is what you need to know. You need to know that a tax expert, when it comes to counting as an audit specialist, they don't count as an audit specialist. So with that, now let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 4. Before relying on the work of a specialist, what is one of the key factors an auditor must assess? So let's walk through this. Option A, the specialist's competency. Option B, whether the specialist was engaged directly by management. Option C, whether the specialist's findings align with the auditor's expectations. Or option D, the cost of the specialist's services. So which one of these is a key factor that they have to assess if they're going to use the work of the specialist? I think this one will probably be pretty clear based on what we've learned so far, but if not, that's okay. Maybe pause the video, think through this, and when you're ready, come back. We'll look at the answer together. All right, here we are. The answer is A, the specialist's competency. So let's walk through this. When determining the extent to which the engagement team can use the work of a specialist, the auditor must evaluate several key factors. So we're going to talk about a lot of the ones that you need to know. First is understanding the objective and scope of the specialist's work. The auditor must ensure the specialist's work aligns with audit objectives and covers the necessary areas. They need to understand why they're using this specialist and what the specialist is going to do and provide for the audit. Now let's talk about assessing the specialist's competency, and that was the correct answer here. The auditor should evaluate the specialist's qualifications, experience, and professional reputation to determine whether they have the necessary expertise. Competency is essential because even a specialist with relevant knowledge could lack the experience needed for the specific engagement. Now let's talk about, finally, evaluating the appropriateness and reasonableness of the specialist's work. The auditor must review the specialist's methods, assumptions, and conclusions to determine whether they are reasonable and supported by appropriate evidence. And that kind of falls into the next blueprint topic a little bit as well. But again, this is a factor that auditors need to consider when they're considering using a specialist. They need to know that they have to evaluate the appropriateness and reasonableness of the specialist's work. And again, like I said before, they have to assess their competency and understand the objective and scope of using the specialist in the auditor's work. Now with that, let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 5. And again, like before, when you see situations like this, you read the last sentence first. Which of the following is a key consideration for the auditor when assessing the reliability of the specialist's work? Let's go to the top. A company's management hires a valuation expert to determine the fair value of certain intangible assets. The external auditor is evaluating whether to use the valuation expert's work as audit evidence. So again, which of the following is a key consideration for the auditor when assessing the reliability of the specialist's work? Let's go through the options. Option A, whether the specialist may be influenced by their relationship with management. Option B, whether the specialist has worked with the company for at least 5 years. Option C, whether the specialist's conclusions align exactly with management's expectations. Or option D, whether the specialist was involved in preparing the company's financial statements. All right, so think about this. Based on what we've learned about specialists and about using the work of others in general so far, I think you could probably kind of think through this. So I want you to pause the video, do this on your own, and when you're ready, come back. We'll look at the answer together. All right, here we are at the answer A, whether the specialist may be influenced by their relationship with management. And by the way, this is something that you would actually want to consider with a management specialist or an auditor specialist. If the specialist has any relationship to the client, this is what you would want to consider. When using the work of a management specialist, the external auditor must evaluate whether the specialist's work provides reliable audit evidence. Since the specialist was hired by management, the auditor must carefully assess whether their relationship with the client could create bias or impair objectivity. And again, even if it wasn't hired by management, if the specialist has a relationship with the client, you're basically going to do these same things. These are the key considerations that you would want to include for that. And we kind of already talked about this for specialists, but again, we're going to hit it again. Objectivity. If the specialist has a close relationship with management or financial incentives tied to their conclusions, their work may be less reliable. The auditor must evaluate whether the specialist is independent or if there are any conflicts of interest. Let's talk about competence. The auditor must assess the specialist's qualifications, experience, and adherence to professional standards. And again, that was what we learned in the previous couple questions. And then reasonableness of their work. The auditor must review whether the specialist's methods, assumptions, and conclusions are appropriate and well supported. So pretty similar between an auditor specialist and a management specialist. An auditor specialist might not have a relationship with the client, so you might not have to worry as much about the objectivity. But if it is a management specialist, you definitely need to make sure that you're looking at the objectivity. But either way, if there's a relationship with the specialist and the client, then you need to make sure that you're focusing on objectivity and making sure they're not biased and things like that. Now, with that, we learned a lot about the factors that you need to consider when you're using the work of others in an audit. Before we do anything else, let's do one more part of the SuperfastCPA process called pillar topics. Now, the idea behind pillar topics is as you're going through the questions to learn the material, you will notice the things that keep popping up. You've seen 2 or 3 or 4 questions trying to teach you about the factors that you need to consider for the internal audit function or for specialists. Again, these are the things you're seeing over and over again, so you know that they are important. So you take a moment during and after you're studying and you write these out as pillar topics in your own words. And as you're doing this each day, you're building your own personal repository of the most important things you learned from the questions in your own words so that you're ready for exam day. Now let's go to the pillar topics. All right, here we are at the pillar topics. Let's just dive straight in. First off, objectivity and competence. Before using the work of an internal audit function, or really pretty much anybody who is not the external auditor, external auditors must assess both the objectivity, whether internal auditors are free from management influence, and competence, whether they have the necessary training, experience, and a track record of high quality work. Now let's talk about supervision and review of internal auditors' work. External auditors remain responsible for the audit and must supervise and review the internal auditor's work. They cannot delegate critical judgment areas such as evaluating significant estimates or making complex accounting decisions. Now let's talk about who qualifies as an auditor's specialist. And again, this is specifically when it comes to the audit exam. You might see people arguing about the tax experts that I'll mention, but again, specifically for the audit exam, tax experts don't count. So let's talk about this. An auditor specialist is an expert in a field outside of accounting or auditing. So that would be things like actuaries, valuation experts, engineers, or legal specialists. Tax experts, while knowledgeable, are not considered specialists because taxation falls within the accounting domain. So again, remember that. Now let's talk about assessing the work of a specialist. Before relying on a specialist's work, the auditor must understand the scope of their work, evaluate their competence, and assess whether their findings, assumptions, and methodologies are appropriate and reasonable for audit purposes. Now let's finally talk about considering the objectivity of a management specialist. Very similar to a normal specialist, an auditor specialist, but it's probably a little bit more prominent when it comes to a management specialist. Since management hires its own specialists, the auditor must determine whether their relationship with the client could impair their objectivity. Even if a specialist is highly competent, bias or conflicts of interest could affect the reliability of their conclusions. And with that, we've gone over the pillar topics for this video. Again, we focused mainly on internal auditors and specialists, but based on what you learned here, I feel like you could apply this to the work of pretty much most others that the external auditor is going to be using the work of. So I just wanted to point that out. Now, before you go, make sure you go check out our Superfast CPA training webinar on SuperfastCPA.com. Again, it's 1 hour, it is free, and we will teach you the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam, so you don't want to miss that. In today's video, we only went over 5 questions, but Superfast CPA Pro members are going to get access to the full 10-question video when we post it in the members forum. So again, if you like this and you like our other videos, make sure you check out becoming a Superfast CPA Pro member so you can get access to a lot of great stuff, including the walkthrough videos, the full versions, and the Pro course where Nate explains in detail over the course of multiple videos exactly how you're supposed to be studying every single day so you can pass the exams. It's basically a much more in-depth version of the webinar, so you definitely want to check that out. Now with that, if you liked the video, make sure to like it and leave a comment. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next video.